Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we welcome a very special guest to Gaming Week, and that's the CEO of Wax. So how you going, William?
Good to see you.
Thanks for joining us today, and this is a fantastic project. We're going to dive into the tech and a bit of your background. So for those that haven't followed your work, what's your background? How'd you get into Opskins and then Wax?
Sure. Well, briefly, uh, so I've been a venture capitalist for since the mid 90s. My partners and I founded the world's first venture capital firm that was targeting the consumer internet. And we were called Idealab Capital Partners. And while it may be hard for some of your listeners to believe, no one wanted to give us money to invest in something as dumb an idea as people using the internet for consumer related things. It was very hard. Eventually, of course, people figured out that it was actually a really good opportunity, and we did quite well. So I continued as a venture capitalist, really as a daily job up until roughly 2012. And that was when, after several years of being pestered, my current partner said to me, please just hear me out about this thing called blockchain and Bitcoin and stuff. And he had been very, very interested in getting me and another partner I had to be interested in Bitcoin and the blockchain, but I didn't think it was worthwhile taking any time to focus on, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And part of that was because of a phenomenon all venture capitalists suffer from, which is we have scar tissue from deals that didn't work out.
Yeah.
And there were a number of what I would call magic internet money type of concepts in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And of course, they didn't have blockchain, but that was a nuance I didn't appreciate at first.
Yeah.
So from the time where I finally said, all right, we'll listen, you persuade us, to the time that we just went all in, was almost immediate. Once we really got the concept that, there's this thing called a blockchain, that was much more intriguing to me at the time. Though I can say the coins are still more interesting to me nowadays than often a lot of the stuff done on blockchains.
Yeah.
But so we started an incubator called Bitropolis. We created a ton of companies, from crypto payment processing companies, crypto wallets. We invented a new type of crypto, a new category of crypto. We called it Tether. And Tether was the idea of linking a real currency to a token. Also, something that for a lot of your listeners, they may think, oh wow, that was a great idea. Well, it seemed like a great idea to us, but to nobody else did it seem like a great idea.
Yeah.
It took us almost a year to get anybody to understand it, and it seemed really clear. But this is the thing about new technologies that was hard. But eventually, people started to get it, and it took off. And along the way, at about 2015, by the way, 2015 was sort of a depressing time if you were in crypto.
Yep.
It had been a lot of negative, much because of government regulation and fear mongering. It was very difficult. It still is very difficult to get a bank account. And we were trying to figure out, my partners and I, what would be the best way to get a lot of people to be interested in crypto. And we figured it would probably be video gaming. And my partner had invented the concept of trading a in-game virtual item for fiat, for currency. He did that in the late 1990s with a game called Ultima Online. And now it's more understood how this works. But I had been on the board of that company. Ultimately, it got sold. It was, in fact, after that company got sold that my partner Jonathan wound up discovering Bitcoin, and took 2 years to get me to be interested, but he figured it out pretty fast. Yeah. So we went back in 2015. We started thinking, wonder if there's a connection between buying and selling virtual items, in-game virtual items, which we call skins. They're a certain type of virtual item, and crypto. So we were looking around to see how we might go about doing that, creating almost like an exchange for that. And we came upon a company called Opskins. And Opskins was allowing people to buy and sell virtual items for fiat and doing very well. And since we had worked at a marketplace that allowed people to trade virtual items for many years, like I said, my partner created the concept, we noticed immediately that there were certain benefits that Opskins had that other sites did not. We became advisors to them, became investors to them, and ultimately we became the management team. So I became the CEO of Opskins. My partner Jonathan became the COO, and we then started to try to integrate cryptos and marketplaces for virtual items. And that was, it was a really useful experience for us because we were redlining much of the world because of credit card fraud, chargebacks, all that. So lots of people wanted to buy virtual items, but couldn't because we couldn't accept their credit cards. Yeah. We figured a great application would be Bitcoin, right? So no chargebacks. So we can take money from any customer, even if they're in a part of the world that has a lot of fraud and whatnot. And so that became very, very successful for us. The ability to now allow people, it's one of the great, I think, values of Bitcoin in particular, is allowing people cross-border to make payments in a way where they probably otherwise wouldn't be able to, because the e-commerce site would just say, hey, we're too worried about fraud.
Yeah.
So that became very interesting to us. And then ultimately, we knew that this whole business would wind up in a decentralized capacity. And so it was in 2017 where we went about designing something called Wax, which is Opskins, basically, but in a decentralized manner.
Yeah.
And so that's the blockchain called Opskins. And then, Wax. And then Opskins is a more traditional centralized marketplace for the buying and selling of virtual goods.
Fantastic. You've touched on so many interesting points already. I think being that forward thinking, but then also being a bit hesitant because of that scar tissue you spoke about. How do you see the industry at large now? Did you face those same sort of obstacles, whereas just in the past 12 months, people are starting to understand these concepts more?
Yeah, it's funny. In 2017, I went around to different conferences and was talking about Wax and what we're building. And I mentioned these things called skins. You know, these virtual items that people buy in games. They dress up their avatar with them and whatnot. And now I thought that the crypto community, given their demographics, would totally know what a skin was. They would understand how people trade them. They would know what Steam is, this giant video game platform where you can buy skins and put them in the games and whatnot. But no, that wasn't the case. So at least in 2017, the typical crypto enthusiast didn't know how to spell video game, quite frankly. So this stuff seemed very new to the vast majority of people. But what they did see was, wow, these are virtual items. People like to trade. They like to speculate in them. They are not backed by anything. If they get stolen, if they are taken from your virtual wallet, you're screwed. There's no way to get them back. Yeah. You know, it sounds a lot like the way cryptos work, right? Yeah. So they're like, oh, these are like cryptos. Like cryptos in every way, except that the blockchain, if you will, is Steam or is Fortnite, or is, you know, whatever. Pick a game, CS:GO. It's just what we would call probably like a private blockchain. Yeah. And of course, our view was it would be much better if these virtual items were transportable out of the game and could be directly owned by those people buying them. And part of the reason we felt that way was because of how expensive some of these items are, thousands to tens of thousands of dollars. And when you think about it, it's pretty sad that you could spend that amount of money for some very rare collectible video game item, and then video game could shut down. The video game could decide they don't want people trading these things anymore, and your asset basically disappears.
Yeah.
So we thought it'd be nice if these things were directly owned by the consumer. What I would tell you, what I thought then, and what I still think now is, anytime an emergent technology appears, it's almost always the case that the first users of that technology are not big incumbent companies that are already in the industry and well established. They tend to be much more cautious about new technologies. It's the smaller companies who are trying to find a leg up, maybe to compete in a new industry. And they have kind of nothing to lose, right? So they're starting from a very, very small base. And if the technology doesn't work, or if it's difficult or whatever, they're not really risking much. So you saw this, of course, with the internet, right? The biggest companies on earth, the biggest retailers, the biggest travel companies, they were not the first to go out and decide to use the internet because they were cautious. Yeah. It was new startups, which wound up becoming very big companies, right? Because they mastered it fast. You saw the same thing with social networking. You see the same thing with mobile, and I would say with crypto. Most businesses that really embrace it sort of are brand new businesses, or they're small and they don't have much to worry about. They don't have a big existing install base that they're worried about maybe screwing up because the blockchain doesn't work the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, I think people have got their head around the concept now of a digital item, or non-fungible tokens has become a bit of a buzzword lately. But I really want to talk about skins themselves, because you've given some good examples in the past about the potential there of owning a couple of items versus being able to own that item in so many different colors or patterns or whatever it is.
Yeah. So what let me describe this because it's. Like a lot of things in the world, it's very confusing to figure out why maybe people do a certain thing, right? Why do people like reality shows? I mean, who knows? They do. Well, with skins, there's a lot of people, and there's been a kind of a refocus on this when the crypto community started to look at skins. And again, skins are virtual items that live maybe in a game. Could be a blockchain game. They could be in your Fortnite, your CSGO, Dota 2, League of Legends, whatever. They're just often, the way I explain it is they're apparel or outfits that you can put on your avatar. The thing that distinguishes a skin from a traditional virtual item in a video game is that the virtual item has in-game utility, meaning it provides you some capability that you didn't have before it. It might give you more power. It might allow you to maybe do something faster, right? It changes your abilities in the game. It gives you true utility. Skins are cosmetic only. They don't give you anything extra. They're just it's just like you have a white t-shirt, you have a blue t-shirt, you have a yellow t-shirt. Those things, the difference in colors doesn't keep you any warmer. It's just a cosmetic. But it turns out people love their cosmetic items in video games. To put it in perspective, when we were doing in the mid 2000s, when we had a marketplace for people buying virtual items, the whole market was about 10 billion US dollars globally. The secondary market for buying and selling these virtual items. These are items that had utility. When skins became invented and then popular, it completely changed how many of these items somebody would want. So the market went from roughly 10 billion to now probably over 50 billion. Just the secondary market. By the way, the primary market went from about 15 billion to about 100 billion USD annually. People buying these virtual items. And the easiest way to describe it would be, because sometimes people will say, well, I get why I would want an item that gave me some utility value in a game. It allowed me to do something better, to play better, better chance of winning. But if it's just cosmetic, why would I want it? And to that, I would say, how many shoes do you have? And those shoes, do they all cover your feet and keep your feet warm when you walk? Yeah. Then why do you need 50 pairs? Well, because you're in 50 different moods, right? Because you like the way they look. And it'll always be that way. Ties, for those people who still wear them, why do you need more than one colored tie? Well, because you want to look different. And so skins ushered in a giant increase in revenue for video game companies, because you can never have enough shoes, right? Whether they're virtual shoes or whether they're real shoes in the real world. And that has become, I think, similarly true for blockchain-based gaming. The difference is, a couple of years ago, blockchain-based games came about, and these things called NFTs, non-fungible tokens, were created. I'd say the first mass market version of that would have been Ethereum's category of non-fungible token, which we call the ERC 721, yeah. Right? But it's just an NFT, non-fungible token. Yeah. So you can have an Ethereum token, and Ethereum token, you can do whatever you want with it. It's just like having a dollar bill. One Ethereum token is the same as another Ethereum token. Or you can have an ERC 721 Ethereum token, where every single token is unique. You know, every single one represents like a different piece of art or whatever. So I'd say Ethereum really popularized that. And now there's many, many different versions of these things. And now video games are trying to integrate at least the blockchain-based video games initially. We really haven't seen any major existing non-blockchain video game company embrace the concept of an NFT token that they can sell to their customers, where the customers could take that token and move it either to another game that uses the same token standard, or just keep in their wallet and trade. No big game company has done that, but that doesn't surprise me. It will happen. It'll happen as all of these smaller blockchain-based game companies start to grow, and then the big companies say, wow, this is interesting. Again, you saw this in mobile, right? All the big companies were cautious, and then they saw, wow, you can actually get a lot of customers if your game is on mobile. And then they ported to mobile too.
Yeah, the numbers are staggering when I was researching how much people do love to spend on this, and it is an expression of themselves, I guess. But the next thing I wanted to talk about was the delegated proof of stake and the system you went for. You just described how Ethereum, was building out all these standards. So what made you go the direction of your own blockchain, and how does the Wax token fit into all that?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in there, and I think they're all very important to address. So the first one was, hey, if Ethereum already does it, why do you need your own blockchain for? And believe me, we were the second largest investors, my partners and I, in the Ethereum ICO. So we really like Ethereum, but I mean, got to say, Ethereum to me is like a test net. Right? For your blockchain listeners don't know what that is. It's a way to experiment, but there is no way to achieve commercial scale on Ethereum, even though we tried, and we did. In June 2018, we ported a bunch of our Opskins marketplace capabilities, virtual items and all that. We launched a Wax version of Opskins, so a blockchain that allows people to buy in, to sell virtual items. It was in a private beta, but it was using the Ethereum blockchain initially. And then we experienced all the reasons why we ultimately knew we could never really long-term build on Ethereum. Yeah. Ethereum has a ton of negatives. Some of those are just are generic, but some are specific to Ethereum. The worst part of Ethereum today is that when you when you have a token, first, you don't know how much it's going to cost you to create an NFT, right? It might cost you 10 US cents. It might cost you 50 US cents. Just depends on how busy the network is. It might take you a minute to create that NFT, or in the case of us, it went from a minute and 30 seconds to 17 hours to create one NFT during a time of mass congestion. And what Ethereum does to deal with congestion is they do if any of your listeners have ever used Uber, there's something called surge pricing. So when there's too many people who want to use too few Ubers, they just jack up the price until only a few people want to use it. That's how Ethereum works. So we went from paying, I don't know, 25 cents to 50 cents to create a non-fungible token on Ethereum to, in a matter of a few hours, to $50 to create a non-fungible token. And that's because they were hit with a ton of traffic and they just had to raise the price to shorten the queue. Now, that wasn't going to work for us. So we were always planning on building our own blockchain, and that's one reason why. Ours is purpose-built for digital goods. So there's a whole bunch of tangential services that I think are necessary for blockchain-based businesses to actually acquire a lot of customers, for customers to want to use that blockchain. Very simple stuff like, how do you make an account? How do you actually connect to Ethereum? How do you actually connect to like EOS, which is another blockchain? Today, you use these god-awful programs like MetaMask or Scatter that have dozens of steps to actually create an account. And in the case of EOS, you can't even create an account yourself. Someone has to invite you to create an account. There's like a catch-22 problem with it. It's a good start, but it's not where it needs to be. What we found from operating the most active blockchain on Earth, and that's what our Wax blockchain had become by like September, October, November of 2018, we were trading so many skins that it was, if you went to a site called like Blocktivity, which ranks blockchains by how many transactions they're doing, it's very interesting to see it. We were number one. And the reason for that was because we were using something called DPoS, which is, without getting too technical, delegated proof of stake. So the way a blockchain validates whether a transaction should go through or whether it shouldn't is known as the consensus mechanism. How does the network decide if it's a valid transaction or not a good transaction? That's called the consensus. And there's many different things: proof of stake, proof of work, delegated proof of stake, proof of burn, blah, blah, blah. We decided we liked delegated proof of stake. And for a lot of reasons, we've written about them in our blog. And it worked at a scale that was good enough. So going from 5 to 10 transactions a second with Ethereum, EOS, they claim, the delegated proof of stake inventor, which is kind of Dan Larimer, he claims it will do thousands, I think, of transactions a second. I don't think it's there yet. But for us, we use delegated proof of stake, and we get several hundred transactions a second. I think we believe we've peaked at maybe 400 a second. That's enough for now. So the reality is, you can't do this on Ethereum. You can't do this on Bitcoin. You can't do this on EOS. You can do it on our chain because we purpose-built it for this. And the key about Wax that differs from every other blockchain is that we have these things, as I mentioned, we call microservices. So creating an account doesn't take 30 steps, it takes 3. Trading an item back and forth is done super simply with a user interface experience that's really intuitive. And then, of course, we allow you to use real money, fiat money, to sell your items. So there's no other blockchain that does that. We can do that because we have a marketplace that accepts fiat. and that marketplace is called Opskins. So and we have a bunch of other services as well that we're launching, all to make it easy. It's I would say it's akin to, think of the Apple App Store. Now, they developed a nice development environment that people could use to create apps in the Apple App Store, but of course that wasn't enough. They also needed to have a way for people to pay for the apps once they get them. They had to be able to make it easy for people to actually create an account on iTunes. And then they had to make it easy for third parties to add like advertising services and whatnot. So it's like a complete ecosystem. And that's the approach we've taken with Wax. Too many of these projects, I think, they just focus on the blockchain part of it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, but it's not enough. It would be like if Tim Berners-Lee, who created the World Wide Web, if he stopped there and said, okay, we can all go home now. Well, no, somebody had to invent a browser. But that wasn't enough. Somebody had to invent a website. Then somebody had to create PayPal. And somebody had to create advertising. And, that's the only way to make it mass market.
Yeah.
And
how does the Wax token fit into that model? And you said you do accept fiat payments as well. So are they all converted into Wax if I'm buying a skin, or how does that work?
Yeah, so everything on the Wax blockchain, of course, consumes Wax in order to do its operations. The question is just, how does one interact with that? Now, there's different models people have. Right now, the prevailing model is if you use any of the popular chains that have dApps, dApps are distributed applications. So video games, blockchain video games, they may sit on top of Ethereum, they may sit on top of EOS, sit on top of Tron, sit on top of Wax. Those customers who want to play that game, they may not want to go and say, I don't have any Wax, or I don't have any Ethereum, or I don't have any EOS. How do I get it? The easiest thing would be for them to use a credit card and then go buy a certain quantity of Wax or Tron or Ethereum, and then spend that in their game. You could even, though, go one level of abstraction more and just say, I'm never even going to expose you to the actual need to purchase these tokens. We'll just do that on your behalf. I do see eventually the world going more to that direction, where people are like, I just want to play your cool game, and I know you use these tokens and they're called XYZs. That's great, but can you just like buy that for me? Yeah. And then, I'll just go and do it. Now, in the video game world, there's a lot of video game companies where you always deposit a certain amount of money, you get a certain amount of their magic tokens, and you use those in the game. So that's the way blockchain systems work today, and that's the way Wax will work, at the beginning as well. But we understand that people want to be able to pay with a variety of different tokens, and so. But the chain itself consumes Wax, and that Wax has a lot of purposes. One is you can use it to stake. So in delegated proof of stake, there's something called staking. Staking allows you to unlock system resources. So a dApp, a distributed application that wants to have a certain amount of resources so it can handle a certain amount of customers and so forth, it needs to then take a certain amount of Wax. Think of it like if you've got a website and you use Amazon Web Services, and you pay for a certain amount of RAM and CPU and networking capacity. It's actually really similar to how a blockchain like Wax works. You pay for a certain amount of systems resources, and you pay for that with Wax. And we don't call it payment, we call it staking, right? When you stake, you also can vote. And unlike Amazon or Google or Facebook, you can't directly vote in those companies to change policies and whatnot. You can in delegated proof of stake systems like ours. We call it the governance model that we have. And in our governance model, there are a number of things people will vote as to what to do. For instance, who's going to run all the little mini data centers that power the network? Well, that's determined by voting. You have a certain amount of tokens, you vote those tokens because you like a certain data center. We call them guilds. some people call them block producers, but they're like data centers that power the network.
Yeah.
And in delegated proof of stake, you are essentially delegating the network operations to these group of these clusters of micro data centers that are powering the network. Okay. So blockchains have a lot going on, as you can see. You can use the tokens to transact, to purchase something. You can also use the tokens to change the governance or to vote on a particular referendum or a particular set of new rules. Yeah. And Wax does all of those things.
So you described that there's already so many items being traded, and I did check out the Wax Explorer just before to see it all chugging along nicely. But what's future plans for you guys, and how is it all progressing? I know Wax, as you said, had that private test net, and then you went to your own model. So how are you seeing it all unfolding?
Yeah. So the Wax protocol or Wax blockchain is going to launch on June 30. So almost about 30 days from the date of this podcast. Yeah. It's going to launch, and when that happens, it will be a public, not a private network. It'll be a public blockchain. Everyone is going to be upgrading their existing Ethereum tokens for the new Wax protocol tokens. And we will have a number of what I mentioned are microservices that people will be able to use in order to create accounts very quickly, two-factor authenticate those accounts. We've got a number of like white label services. So people will be distributed applications will be able to use these services. They won't have to build them themselves. Simple thing that you would think, well, technical things, random number generators. So random number generators, or RNGs, are basically pervasive in almost every product, right? If you've got a Spotify app and you ever turn on shuffle to change up the music, that's a random number generator. But video games constantly use random number generators to dictate the path of where you're going to go or how people are going to organize and so forth. But there's never been a random number generator that was built natively on blockchain. And there's a number of reasons why he would want that. What happens today is any DApp, any distributed application that uses a random number generator today has to go and build their own. Yeah? And then you got to know, is it really reliable, trustworthy? So that's just one little feature, because we know video game operators like RNGs. We built that natively onto the blockchain. Also, because we're DPoS, a delegated proof of stake blockchain, we're backwards compatible with EOS, which is another big blockchain. So if you're a DApp and you have a smart contract on the EOS blockchain, you change a couple of lines of code, and that will then work on the Wax blockchain. Yeah. And the Wax blockchain also has lots and lots of customers. We also have co-marketing capabilities. So Opskins is a big, well-known in the video game world. We have millions of customers. And for dApps that we think are really good, we're going to do cross promotions. So we'll be able to introduce those dApps to, frankly, what they want almost more than anything. They want customers using their dApps. And what we've seen is the biggest hurdles customers using dApps is first, the account creation process being terrible. Yeah. And then second, a lot of these blockchains are really slow, and it takes a long time to conduct a simple transaction. People get bored, they go off. Ours is fast from a blockchain perspective, as fast as anything out there.
Fantastic. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed that conversation today, William. I'm sure we'll keep track on everything you guys are doing, and I'll put the links to follow in the description below. But thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, guys.